Okay, Francesca, could you verify we have a quorum?
Yeah.
We do have a quorum.
We do. Okay. I believe we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to our first mixed meeting in a while. Good to see some people in person. This is the Audit Committee, Friday, May 13th, 12:30, 2022. Before we get started, I'd like to ask interpreter Nancy Hand to introduce herself and walk through how to access our interpretation services. Nancy?
With pleasure. Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Hand, and I'll be the interpreter for this afternoon's meeting. I will present instructions in Spanish, followed by English. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación o el globo terráqueo y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en un celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos o 3 puntos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. To use the Zoom interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon that looks like a globe and select either English or Spanish. If you are joining using the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other device, press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. If you're joining us today in person at Sandag and need interpretation into Spanish, please check out a headset from the receptionist on the 7th floor. The headset looks like a little iPod and comes with an earpiece, which you can use to hear the meeting in Spanish. Simply hold the earpiece to your ear and the interpreter will come on automatically. Si se ha unido a la reunión de hoy en la sala de juntas de Sandag y necesita interpretación al español, por favor diríjase a la recepción del piso 7 y solicite un receptor. El receptor se parece a un pequeño iPod y se puede usar para escuchar la reunión en español. Simplemente sostenga el auricular junto a su oído y la interpretación comenzará automáticamente. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, why don't we go ahead and move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us for that. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll move on to the approval of the meeting minutes. Are there any members of the public with comments on the minutes? I don't have a Zoom screen anymore, so I can't tell.
Chair, I don't see any. Well, Mayor Jones is in the attendees with her hand up. I'm not sure what item she'd like to speak on, but I'm going to go ahead and open her mic just in case it's on the minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. No, it's actually on the public comments. So it'd be the agenda item number 2. Thank you.
Good to see you then. Thanks, Mayor Jones. Do any board members have any comments on the minutes? Seeing nobody with their hands up, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
A motion to approve the
Motion
minutes.
by Bob. I'll go ahead and second. Call for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Chair Zito.
Yes.
Board Member Mayor Vasquez.
Yes.
Public Member Agnes Wong Nickerson.
Yes.
Public Member Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
And Public Member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and that item passes unanimously.
Great. So now we will move on to public comments, communications and member comments. We'll start with public comments. So why don't we go ahead and unmute Mayor Jones.
Thank you so much, Chair Zito. So today I am attending as a public commenter. I had sent over a request on April 23rd regarding the the use of personal credit cards for the reimbursements. I'm sorry, reimbursement of personal credit cards. So there is a lot of things that are happening right now with our P cards, and a lot of information out there, as you all know and understand. What I had asked for, and I'm hoping that the audit committee will also agree with me, is that we really need to be fully transparent. In my city, we have both credit cards that are reimbursed, and then we also have P cards within the organization. And so for full transparency, I would love to have Sandag get out from under this cloud of not having full transparency, and an organization that can bring information out to the public to show that we are using their taxpayer dollars openly and fairly. And so anyway, moving forward, I would like to see us have an issue where we, or I'm sorry, an audit, where we are having that also looked at, so that we are fully transparent with our communities, with all of our cities. And so anyway, I think it's an important step moving forward to bring both the board together, and then also for our Sandag to have confidence in what we're bringing to the folks out in the public. Because many of our, I mean, when we're talking about steak dinners out there and all of that, I just have a real issue with that. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that I did send that letter over on April 23rd. I sent it to board leadership, and my hopes are that the audit committee will indeed be able to have this looked at by our independent auditor, so that we can move the organization forward. So thank you very much for your time and consideration to my my discussion today.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. Yeah, we did, we do have a lot of work going around the results that were found in that audit, and there was supposed to be an action plan presented today, or I should say the plan to present it today, but we're just going to have a review, and hopefully we'll close on that one really soon, and staff and the board will review and be able to be happy with what the actual policies will be going forward. Mary, I don't know if you wanted to add something to that comment.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I am remote today. I wanted to be there for our first meeting, but I had prior engagements before we changed our meeting dates, so I needed to meet those. Yeah, real briefly, I did receive the letter and the request from Mayor Jones, as well as did the rest of the board. And, there is a level of review that we should do just to make sure we did our diligence. But I also look at the risk and the priorities of those risks. So when I bring the audit plan for next fiscal year forward, which will come to June to the audit committee, I have allocated some hours not to do a full 5-year review. I don't think a full 5-year review is really necessary. I think we can do a much shorter review and if there's anything, get what we need from that, just to, ensure that we're doing our full circle of diligence. However, the contract audit, as you're very aware, we're in the process of that, and that is really priority. There are a lot more risk around that area from an internal and external perspective. And so our focus is at the end of this fiscal year and probably into October of next fiscal year, our focus will solely be on contract audits.
Thanks for the update, Mary. Mayor Vasquez, do you have a comment?
Yes. So during our meeting this morning, the board meeting, Colleen, she gave an update regarding the use of credit cards and the fact that policy will move forward to the board for us to approve. That's coming. But also they will spell out in the policy how the reports will come forward. Very detailed in terms of the reason why perhaps a steak dinner could take place, what was discussed during the dinner, so that everything is transparent. She also mentioned that these reports would come forward on a regular basis. I believe it was quarterly. So that information was shared with the entire board today. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone here was aware that that information was shared with the board.
Thanks for the update, Mayor Vasquez. Do we have any other public comments, Francesca?
No, no more public comments. Thank
Okay,
you.
any other board members looking to make comments in the public comments area? Ed, go ahead. Can't hear you, you're muted.
Yeah.
There you
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that we're all clear that these reports that come from Mary and the Audit Committee in general are reports that go directly to the board. I know sometimes that there's a little bit of confusion, and I think that happened at the last meeting we had when it was in person, but these are for the benefit of the board members and not necessarily the executives at Sandag.
Good point, Ed, thanks. So that way we'll go ahead and move on to the agency report. And Colleen, are you taking that?
I am today,
Okay,
yes.
thanks,
Yes, thank you,
great.
Chair, and good afternoon, Audit Committee members. I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm providing the agency-wide update. Just a few things to share with you. Earlier this week, Hassan and I had the pleasure of attending the inauguration of the Tijuana International Airport's new passenger processing facility at the cross-border terminal. And the governor of Baja was there, the mayor of Tijuana, and several other folks who have worked on bringing that, that facility to life. And we've been working a lot with them on the cross-border, the third border crossing, and they used that opportunity, many of the electeds, to talk about their appreciation for the collaboration with Sandag. So that was really positive. You know that Sandag has been working closely with Caltrans to continue our partnership with Mexico on that third border crossing, and where we are right now is working very closely with the federal government to try to get the additional staff necessary to make sure we can fully open that entire facility. Last week also, the entire project team for Otay Mesa East and consultants had meetings with our rating agencies so that we can get the funding needed for the program. And so we met with Moody's, Fitch, and S&P over 2 days to talk about the benefits of the financial plan. And that we also took the rating agencies down for a tour to show them the new SR11 facility. I also wanted to mention that on May 1st, we launched our Youth Opportunity Pass. So this is the free transit for youth 18 and under. We really see this as a way to align with the board's commitment, the Sandag Board of Directors' commitment to equity, and also really provides a life-changing opportunity for many of our youth in the region. There were more than 1,500 youth pass signups in advance. The preliminary numbers that we're getting from MTS, we are waiting to get the numbers from NCTD, but they have a 20% increase in weekday youth ridership system-wide. That's 50% on the trolley, and 35% increase on Saturday. Next, we're excited about Bike to Work Day. So that'll be next week on the 19th. There are many Sandag board members and audit committee members are welcome to stop by one of our pit stops and take part in that activity. And then just a couple of other things. Mary and I are going to talk later, and it's agendized to talk about the response to the purchase card audit and where we are in that process. I know we've had a chance to prep a little bit with you, Chair. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that last week, Victoria Stackwick, who is our Chief of Staff, and I were in Washington, D.C., attending the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors. I was recently appointed to that board, and that's a place where Sandag can have a role at a national level to make sure we're getting our fair share, or as we like to say, more than our fair share of funding for trade in the region. And certainly with the border crossing, not only we make it very clear that it's not just about the water ports, it's our land ports here too in the region. And then lastly, next week, I will be going with Chair Blakespear to Sacramento for the annual chamber trip. And again, that's the opportunity for us to go and meet with state agencies and legislators and making sure they're well aware of what's happening in the San Diego region, what the opportunities are to get funding in the region to continue to support the priorities of the agency and the board. So that concludes my report, and thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Appreciate the report. Would note it's actually looking forward to Bike to Work Day, but it's also Bike to Work Month. And in that spirit, I did bike down here today. So
That's
it's
great. And we
gotta-
do have T-shirts, so we can
There you
make sure
go.
that you have T-shirts.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's great.
and then we have them in various sizes, so.
And with that, do we have any public member comments on the report?
No public comments on this
Thank you.
item.
Any board members wanting to make a comment? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to the IPA's report. Mary?
Yes, hi. Hello again. Thank you. This will be a real quick update. I just wanted to update a couple of activities. As far as a corrective action plan, you'll have the full plan brought to you at year end, which will be in June. We'll be bringing you that report. However, I did want to point out that there was two items with various actions on the vendor audit corrective action plan that was due both in November and December was the dates that they were supposed to be due. And I did do a follow-up and got a couple of responses that there was going to be some delays around them. I did ask for an updated corrective action plan with the revised dates and the reasons for the delays, and they were going to get that to me. I haven't yet seen that, but I did just want to make a note that there were two action items that were due in November and December with several different tasks that were supposed to be completed that had not yet been completed, and I have not received an updated corrective action plan. So I know that they've committed to bringing that to me, but it's been a few weeks and I still haven't received it. So I did want to make a note that we do have some delays there. They have had a verbal discussion with me that they would be updating the plan and giving the reason why there is a delay. The last action is around an ERP system, which, as you know, that's not going to get done anytime soon. It is in the process, but the other two actions were doable and by the end of last year. So just a heads up on that. The next thing I wanted to speak with you about, sorry, I've got something in my throat, is the vacant position. We have one and we've been trying to fill it. I did have a potential candidate and I am trying with all mighty to hang on to him and hopefully get him on board. But we're running into a few struggles, which we're trying to work out. But hopefully we'll have someone joining us by the new fiscal year, I'm hopeful. If not, that's going to be hours that I have to consider when I revise the plan around those hours. The audit plan is up and running. We're doing great with the risk discussions. I am really excited to say there were only, I think, 4 of all the board members that I have not yet met with. So I got a really good turnout, absolutely great turnout this time. I did meet 100% with all management, and it was really successful. And I even have a couple of ITALC board committee members that are scheduled to have meetings with me around risk, which I can also incorporate and consider if I need to. So just an update with that. It went really, really well. And then the last is the contracts audit. Contracts audit, it's both a lot of training and understanding around how they do contracts at Sandag, their processes, a lot of policies, a lot of procedures, and a lot of involvement from different parties. As a result of that, it's becoming quite large, and we want to make sure that we get a very good report out, and we want to make sure that we're diligent in our testing and what we're looking at, and that we're not just rushing to get things out the door. So with that understanding, we've decided at this point that we're going to break this audit up into 2 parts. So it will be one audit, but it will have 2 parts to it. The first part is going to be an internal review, sort of like around operations, around controls, around policies and procedures. That will come to you probably July or August. And then the second part will be around the impact of any weaknesses we found in those areas, because we will be auditing the contractors to assure that contractors have kind of held up their end of the deal. around contracting, and that they're adhering to the contract, they're staying within the scope, and that there's no conflict of interest or no kind of control, overreaching controls around contractors. So that will be part 2. And, you know, we will have some findings, and that's why I decided to break it up into 2 different parts. So those findings are not lost. I mean, I think if we have one big report, it will just be overwhelming to the reader. And we really want to, you know, make sure that this is a useful tool moving forward. So that just a heads up there. And with that, I have no further updates.
Thanks you, Mary. Do we have any public member comments for Mary's update?
No comments from the public.
And would any board members like to comment? Seeing none. Nice update. Well, again, whoop, sorry, did I miss?
I'm not sure if Stuart had one.
Now, whoa, a lot of people jumping in all of a sudden. Okay. Ed, you can go first.
Okay, real quickly, Mary, I know the last time we discussed staffing, and it was kind of a 2-prong issue with getting the people. It's finding qualified people that were not really going to be overwhelmed with the workload, and then paying them at a rate that is commensurate with the amount of work they're going to do. Have we made a new application to management to do a survey on what we can afford to pay, what we should be paying, and how aggressive are we with our recruiting efforts to locate those people?
Thank you, Ed. I will have to say that there was an adjustment done to this auditor's wage already. So I think, though San Diego's, it's really difficult because things are getting really expensive here, the cost of living and rent and everything. In fact, just in the last 3 years I've been here, it's raised in a crazy amount since then even. And I didn't even realize how much until I was looking when I was trying to pull someone from another area within the state who actually lives in the Bay Area. But even for him, it was a shocker. And so I will say that is something that we may have to look at again to make sure that we're paying attention to the cost of living that's really increased in San Diego, because I think that is one issue. The other one, Ed, is just the inability for really good auditors that have relevant government auditing experience at that level and the type of auditing that's required to have an understanding at Sandag. So it's really, quality is really difficult to find at this time, and especially because there's a lot of remote being offered. And I have moved to a flexible remote, so hopefully that will engage individuals to be more interested. So I think we just have to wait and see, and if not, take some actions to try to do something else.
I just think it's really critical that, given where we are at this point in time and what's made public and what we're having to go through, that I don't want this organization to be called on the carpet for what have you done since then, and we're still lagging behind in our efforts to make sure we have a very robust and fully staffed and well-paid audit team. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Stuart?
Thanks. Mary, when you presented to ITAC earlier in the week and you were talking about the risk assessment process and the interviews, you referenced discussions that you had with the interviewees about risk and their role in relation to risk. And since then, I went back and I looked at board policy number 1, which states what the responsibilities of the Sandag board are. And unless I missed it, I don't think risk awareness, mitigation, management is actually even mentioned as part of the responsibilities of the board. So my question is, does it go without saying that a public board like Sandag's has, in fact, responsibility for risk awareness, management, and mitigation? Or to the extent that that's not a given, might we be advised to consider proposing an amendment to Board Policy 1 that makes that more explicit? Because I don't know if in the conversations you had with people, if people seem to embrace the fact that that was part of their job, or because it's not in board policy one, they think it's like your job, not theirs.
Stuart, that is a super good question. I have to share with you. Something I had to clarify with a lot of board members that honestly just didn't know. One of the biggest areas when I'm having the risk discussion is, do you consider risk in your role as the governing board? Does management have discussions around risk with you on an annual basis, sort of like I'm doing with you now? And I was kind of, I wasn't shocked. I wish I could say I was shocked, because it's often misunderstood where risk responsibility lies, right? And so I had to explain that at the governing board is actually where the tone of risk is set. Risk tolerance and the willing to accept a certain level of risk for an organization as a whole is actually set at the governing board. It's the responsibility of the board to set those risks, the tolerance of those risks. It's the responsibility of management, along with the auditor, to identify areas of risk from a management risk perspective and also from an audit risk perspective, which is my job. But it is not my responsibility to mitigate risk. That is solely on management and the board. And so what I did find with some board members is they just didn't see it that way. They understood that risk was sort of my job. And I did explain to them, it may not be in board policy 1, but it certainly is in board policy 42, which is a policy I put into place when I came here. And it's around system controls. And system controls and COSO, which is really management's tool, not the auditor's tool, but often misunderstood that it is the auditor's tool. It's not. We just audit by it. It clearly states in there the responsibility of governing boards and management, and it clearly states that risk is their responsibility.
Well, thanks. In all fairness to board members, maybe this is just something that needs to be emphasized as part of new board member orientation or whatnot, because, it's wonderful that you've got the much increased participation rate in the interviews this year versus last year. And it just sort of jumped out at me as maybe it's just a question of the fact that people aren't exactly sure where that responsibility lies. So I appreciate the education that you do as part of those interviews. I think the risk assessment is one of the most foundational things that you and this committee do as part of risk awareness and mitigation. And so just maybe going forward, we just need to understand that that education is something that just needs to be sort of hammered home time in and time out. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to close that out, Stuart, I will say, like I said, I'm not shocked. It is often in government misunderstood whose role risk is. That's not an unusual misunderstanding. I will say the majority of the board, and anything that I found during my discussion with the majority of the board that was kind of consistent along all of them, I did share with Colleen and with Ray what I was finding. And I did make several recommendations even to the board members that maybe they need to take a day, have a special meeting, and really have a ability to discuss what risk looks like and what we mean by the different risk themes that we should be talking about, because it's not an easy thing to understand, but you really have to explain the process around it. And then that opens the door up for the conversation for board members to go, oh, well, of course I know what that means, because here's my worries, right? But they just don't collate the two. And so that takes the training that's needed, I think.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Stuart. Just to add a little bit of context, and Mayor Vasquez can also jump in a little bit as well, as having sat on the board, and I had some of this conversation with Mary as well when we had our one-on-one, just that while I don't necessarily, in my time on the board, see explicit discussions with risk as the primary focus of the topic, it is reasonably well discussed, and I think the majority of the board members do actually understand that when we make big decisions, the risk involved in those big decisions is discussed, and it is clearly understood that the board is the one setting the direction. I mean, as a matter of fact, that's why the last regional plan effort was thrown out, was because the risk involved with that regional plan, right? The board said, we got to throw this out and we got to start over. And that was specifically based upon what you could construe as a risk conversation. So it does exist. And I do think driving clarity around there, and from the perspective of where to have that topic, normally we have our annual retreats, and those are good opportunities to discuss where things like this fit in. Hopefully we'll get back to that, because those are very good opportunities to become cohesive as a board. But I do think that having a little bit more explicit conversation might be useful in that particular context. But thanks for bringing it up. Agnes?
Yes, I actually have two different questions, comments about what we just talked about. The first one is related to, I agree about the risk assessment, and I think it's really good, Mary. Thank you so much for sharing, for clarifying, your office job is to work with management to identify the risk, but ultimately management and the board need to take actions to mitigate the risk. So it concerned me a little bit, a couple of things. I think you mentioned earlier that one of your vendor audit that for whatever reasons, the responses or the actions supposed to be taken by management or staff got delayed. And I know that the P-card draft policy, I was expecting that we would see something, this time around, just like Mayor Jones talked about, right? We don't want this to be, this cloud hanging out there for a long period of time. I mean, the sooner we can have some kind of a solution and to close the issue, to show the public that we are taking these issues very seriously, that we have taken actions. So my question is, how do we have put in some process or tools so that we can try to stick to the, say, audit timeline that, when management is supposed to give their feedback so that we can resolve this issue, timely. So I do expect a full answer today, but I would really like, the board and, management to look into this and come back maybe in the next meeting. I've seen board that actually.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if we should have this context in the discussion of the actual agenda topic, that particular, and address it at that point in time. Largely, I want to try to make sure we keep the meeting moving along and don't discuss something twice. So it's a good question, but we do have an agenda item around the P-card update, and we should probably be asking questions around that in that topic.
Okay.
So did you say you had a second question?
Yes, the second one, going back to Ed's original question about a salary, do we have the right salary to attract the right people? My question is, do we actually have done a salary survey recently, make sure not only recruiting new staff, but also to retain the existing staff?
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Agnes. That was a good question. There was a salary study recently done for various classifications within SANDAG. And as a result, adjustments were made, and last year they did approve a new salary schedule. I am not sure, and I don't believe that the audit classification was looked at, though they did get an adjustment. So the Lloyd's level and Mike's levels did bump up. Their top pay scale did bump up. And so I believe it was adjusted accordingly, like the rest of the organization was. So it's just now a matter of, is it enough that we're able to compete and retain a good auditor with the current situation, the inflation and everything else, the crazy prices in San Diego rents now and all that other stuff. I mean, I recently heard that everyone's moving to San Diego because there's the remote. Now they can work remotely. So they love San Diego, and now here's their ability to live here, enjoy this beautiful city, and work from home. And so it's really driving the prices of rent here. So, that may impact our ability to get resources.
Thanks, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Was that answer your question, Agnes? Just checking. Okay. Oops, you're muted, but that's okay.
Oops, sorry. So yes, that's very helpful, but it sounds like some of your staff, their salary get adjusted, probably still need to be evaluated. Is it, still competitive enough? I want to make sure, full staff, not just some of them, like including
Right.
yourself, will be included in that review.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Vasquez.
So I'd like to echo the comments that were shared by Chair Zito, but also make a recommendation that I know we're going to have a workshop on Thursday, May 26th, and perhaps that might be a great opportunity to provide an update to the board members, since we'll be there as part of the workshop.
Yep, thanks, Mayor Vasquez. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and move on to our main part of our agenda and the reports. And the first item is the Office of the Independent Auditor's performance measure results for fiscal year 21-22. And I believe, Mary, you'll take this?
Yes, I can take this and then I'm going to kind of hand it back to you, Chair Zito.
Okay.
But what I was asked to do is it's April was my 3 years. And so I'm due another review. And so Chair Zito asked, well, are we able to look at the performance measures that we set for this fiscal year and get some measures? And I was able to do that, with the exception of the last item, which is really just a 360 review. It's not something I have control over. So with that, I did go ahead and provide you with the performance measures that we set for myself and for my team for this current fiscal year. And those outcomes, the actual outcomes of those are available here for your review. I will say I'm pretty proud of these numbers, quite proud of these numbers, and even 87 can be boosted up because we got a few more risk discussions in. But the one area that I failed in was the 75%, which I provided a note 1. And I use that term fairly, but a little bit harshly on myself, because I am using strict facts and numbers. And so it did come up with a 75%, maybe a little closer to 80, because, we are somewhat into the contracts audit. But as a result of losing resources, as a result of some delays around the contracts audit process, we did not meet that 80% target that I hoped to meet around planned engagements versus number of engagements conducted. So with that, Chair Zito, I will bring it back to you.
Great, and thanks for collecting the information. It's very good to see. I guess I'll start with a question myself, which was, do you know what the process is to initiate the last item that's on this list? Is that something that's been decided? I mean, obviously, in order for it to happen, something has to be done to actually initiate that review. Is that something you would expect yourself to do, or are you looking for someone in management to kick it off, and then we have to sort out who that would be?
Last time, it was a subcommittee of Stuart and Bob that retained somebody which then worked with me, and I selected a number of board members, audit committee members, my own staff, and members of management to participate in interviews and sort of a 360 type review. And then the results came back to the audit committee. My one request would be that it not take almost a year like it did the last time, because I've worked hard, and I do deserve my raise as everyone else received theirs last June, last July. So hopefully we can be a little bit more speedy on it. That's all that would be my request. But that was the process last time, Chair Zito. It was a subcommittee, and then we went from there.
I'll be curious to see what the rest of the members say, but thanks for the update. And yeah, I believe that having a timely process would be important. So do we have any public member comments on this topic?
There are no public comments.
Okay, any board members care to chime in at this point? Hey, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Zito. Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think we need to be timely on this. And if I recall, and Stuart or Mary, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think the policy that governs the audit committee requires the audit committee to actually perform her performance review. That's why Stuart and I had done it last year. And one of the reasons that it took so long is that we went outside and brought in an individual to kind of conduct that. And it was kind of a new thing, to be very honest with you. We weren't quite sure how to go about doing it. That's one reason it went so long. I know that Stuart and I had actually talked about possibly it's something where we wouldn't have to go outside. We have everything here that was kind of questions that were asked, those kinds of things. It could be maybe conducted in-house. That would shorten that time period. So I just wanted to add that kind of context to where we go from here. But I agree, it needs to be a whole lot more timely than it was the last time.
Thanks, Bob. Any other input or comments? Or also including on the report itself and the results? Stuart?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Bob said, we with a consultant designed a survey tool, part of the length of the process was that unlike where we are now is at that time, we actually didn't have goals and objectives to measure Mary against. So it was a fairly elaborate process to make sure that the tool that we devised was actually a fair one. That was a work for hire type situation. So we own that survey. We could use it, run it ourselves again, if that's something that the committee wanted to do as part of this process.
Okay, so the tool itself is something that's available, or does staff have other survey tool type capabilities that can be made use of for this type of function?
I mean, it was a Survey Monkey survey.
Survey Monkey, okay.
So it's literally just the question of distributing the link to an agreed upon group of people, and then the data gets compiled automatically. There's,
right,
et cetera. So,
and that's what was used last time. And the consultant was then primarily there to help you with the questions?
Well, I'll try to make this short. The consultant was there partly because, again, we did not actually have objectives and goals to measure Mary against. So it was a process of trying to use an outside expert to help us in the context of a situation like that, create goals and measures which would be considered to be fair, given that it was all sort of hindsight. And so we were really trying to do a balancing act of wanting to be both appropriate but also fair, given that that Mary did not have predefined goals going into the year to measure against. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So in that context, I mean, I personally do think it would be useful and helpful to run it through a subcommittee again, so we can start it now and move forward and get it done more in a timely fashion. Personally, I tend to like to try to have some consistency as well as some, new energy. So I don't know what others think, meaning like maybe if one person from last year wanted to sign up again, and if we had a second person that would be new, that would be interested in serving in such a role, or I'm open to other ideas as well. I don't know if Bob, you and Stuart both are interested, or if one is not as interested in doing the subcommittee, and if there's anybody else that would be interested in participating in the effort this year on getting this accomplished.
I don't have a problem with that. I kind of agree with you. It would be nice to get some new eyes in there, if you will, for new ideas.
Right.
And so, but I'm open. If no one else wants to do this, I can certainly. I'm open to helping.
Okay.
I'm not sure how Stuart feels about it,
Okay.
Or Agnes, or anyone else on the audit committee.
Great, thanks. Agnes?
Yeah, my suggestion, since Bob and Stuart, worked on it last year, so they're more familiar with the tool. I'm more than happy to join. Maybe we will have 3 people this year, and then next year
Have a quorum, so it has to be no more than 2 because we can't do a quorum. Normally, I'd be happy with 3,
I see.
but there's
Okay.
only 5 voting members, so we do have to limit it to 2 of us.
Got it. Okay.
So in that context, are you still interested in participating?
I'm happy to, yes.
Okay, and Stuart or Bob, are you both willing, or somebody have a strong desire to do it again?
I would say I'm willing.
Okay,
I'm not sure how Stuart feels about it.
I'm also willing to have Bob do it.
okay, awesome.
But in all seriousness, I'd be happy to do it as well. We could arm wrestle it or whatever you want.
So with that, I would, then I guess before we go on to the particular action item that, I would like to make comments and just congratulate Mary and the team on a good year. I mean, the results here are clearly evident of hard work, and we all know through just personal interactions how hard you and your team work, and particularly importantly, how objectively you do it in a way that makes it, clear that you're just there for the best interest of the organization, and that's very much appreciated. I'm glad we have these measures. That's very helpful, and I want to make sure that the report, appreciate the report and the information that came back, and it's what I wanted to see, and it was really useful to see. But I do want to make sure that we move forward with the next step. So with that, I would go ahead and make a motion that we set up a subcommittee consisting of Ms. Agnes Wong-Nickerson and Bob, and to do the 360 survey for this year. And they can work with staff and Mary on the good set of people to go and get that information from and take it at that. So I'm not sure if I have a second.
I second.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez. So second from Vasquez. Can you call for the vote?
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Chair Zito.
Zito, yes.
Board Member Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vasquez, yes.
Public Member Agnes Wong-Nickerson.
Yes.
Public Member Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
And Public Member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you, and that item passes unanimously.
And with that, I guess I would just pose a question to you, Mary. Before this is done, again, I want to see that we can get this done in a timely fashion. I'll be continuing to press these 2 on to make sure that happens. Would you like these results to go to the board? I think it's useful as they are. And so we can go ahead and send the report as it is to the board, saying that we've set up, including the information that we set up a subcommittee to address the last item as well. Does that make sense to you?
I'm comfortable if it goes to the board now, or if it goes to the board as a complete package when you've done the last part, and then your part and my part, as far as the results of the performance measure, can all go at one time.
Okay, Mayor, do you have
I'm totally good with that.
an opinion on that? You're on the board. Would you like to wait until we get the next step done, do you think, or?
Yeah, I'd like to wait until we get the next step done.
We'll wait at least one meeting and then see where the subcommittee is at that point, and because I don't want to keep it delayed too much. But if it looks like we're making good progress, then maybe we can put it together and send it at a single time. So we'll hold off on that for now. If everybody,
I'm in support of making sure that we provide as much information in a complete package as possible. That way, the majority of the questions can be answered up front. Rather than having to take the questions and then go back at a later date. So that's why I say perhaps we should just wait a little bit before we actually move forward.
Thanks, Mayor. And with that, I think we've closed out this agenda item unless any other board. Oh, Stuart, you're back up.
If I could just for clarification, I know that performance review and salary adjustment are 2 different things. But just for clarification, could somebody describe how this particular performance review might relate to the question of salary adjustment, and given where we are in the budget cycle and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the one thing that is of a general habit I would note, and even this happened even last year, is that when, generally we do try to couple them somewhat, but the salary adjustments have historically been made retroactively back to the point of when they should apply. So for example, last year, Mary actually had, my understanding is Mary had 2 salary adjustments because it was so delayed. There was one that went back 1.5 years to the point where she should have had her first raise, and then there was another one that went back 1/2 year to the point where she should have had her second raise. So my assumption and what I would be advocating for to the board is that when the salary adjustment is actually ascertained, it would apply back to April, which should be her annual anniversary of her hire date. But it is helpful for the board to see the outcome of the performance to understand what the right salary adjustment would be as well. So it might take a little bit of time for us to work through that, but if it gets too long, we'll press on forward as well.
And it wouldn't be too late in the board's consideration of the next fiscal year budget to make whatever adjustment, or is there some adjustment that's already built into the new budget?
That's a good question, but I need to rely on someone on staff to answer.
There is, I can answer that. So typically the positions are budgeted for their maximum salary. And so we would be okay with that, we would still be within that line. So we're okay there because I'm not expecting to be paid more than what the salary schedule shows. So the budget is up to the salary schedule that shows on the approved classifications. So we should be good there.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Chair Zito, I did want to say one thing because you pointed it out, and I hopefully I did as well. These are my performance measures, and I am ultimately responsible for the office and for these measures being successful or unsuccessful. But I could not have had this type of success if it was not for the very small staff, but very diligent and committed staff that I have. So I think that's so important to point out because they have been working just as hard as me and meeting deadlines and working that extra effort if it's needed and without complaint. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes, and once again, we appreciate the efforts of your entire team, as small as and mighty as they may be. Okay.
Thank you.
So we will move on to item number 6, which is an update on the purchase card audit. And my notes tell me that we will start with Mary and/or Colleen. I'm not sure who.
I thank you, Chair. Colleen Clements, and I'll start. And I want to start off by saying, first of all, how much management here at Sandag appreciates the Office of the Independent Auditor, and that we take very seriously what comes out of these audits because we know it makes us better as an organization. And I think Mary pointed out something at our last board meeting that we haven't had an internal auditor like this. And so we're really like, I forget exactly how you said it, Mary, but it made a lot of sense that we're pulling back like 20 years worth of sheets and blankets to look at our operating procedures, policies, how we do our work as an organization. And there are definitely areas that need modernization. And we take that seriously again and appreciate Mary and her team in helping us be able to do that. So, and also just getting to Member Wong Nickerson's point, we've worked really diligently and personally, I feel quite quickly, given that this purchase card audit came out in January, and we're here just 4 months later, very close at having a response to the action plan. And I, again, here just want to stress the appreciation I have for Mary. We have done a lot of work to get these policies in shape. And on Friday afternoon, we both realized that there were some areas that we still needed to address. And we're confident that when we come back in a month, we will have a solid set of policies. So what I wanted to do is just take a minute and share with you kind of where we are in the process. And then I know Mary has some thoughts to share. So first of all, what we're coming up with now are 3 policies. So updating the purchase card policy to be very clear on how cards can be used, what kinds of things they can be used for, and how they can be the approval process, and the documentation that's necessary to go along with that. So really tightening up that purchase card policy. So that's the first one. The second, and this really is because there's been so much so many questions around food and how we can pay for food. So we're proposing a new policy, which we call a business meals policy. And that will specify exactly what is considered to be a business meal, who could it be, who can be part of a business meal, and it'll tie directly back to federal guidelines on limits for food. So there are federal guidelines about how much for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that is going to be tied back to that. It also includes, as the Vice Chair, Mayor Vasquez mentioned, and I reported this out at our board meeting this morning, that we will be providing a regular report on the business meals, who attended and what the meeting purpose was, whether it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, what that purpose was, and who the people were that were involved in that meal. The third policy is what we're calling hospitality and events. And so this policy gets to when we provide food at an event. For example, we had the groundbreaking for the Landis Bikeway a couple of weeks ago. We provided coffee and donuts there. So this will lay out when we can do that, when there are events, if we're hosting some sort of a public meeting, to be able to provide, say, sandwiches and chips at one of our policy committee meetings or for your meetings. This will specify then the kinds of things where we can provide, where we can fund food. And again, it will tie back. So if we know that there will be 10 members here, we're buying lunch, we stay within the federal guidelines for what that per person lunch would be. The other thing that we're going to be doing is laying out, there will be cases where we may have a business meal, and let's say the limit for the business meal is $20 a person. And somebody orders a lunch that goes to $25. We're laying out specifically how that $5 gets paid back to the organization. So we're going to be really specific on that. I think it is clear that we need to be able to pay for food. We just need to be able to explain how we pay for food, that it is serving a business purpose, and tying that again back to federal guidelines. So there are just a few areas where I want to get together with Mary and make sure that we've got the questions that she has raised fully addressed, and we'll go from there. So I know, Mary, you wanted to provide some points too, and then I'm happy to answer any questions from any of the members.
Sure. As you can see from the agenda item, I was going to provide a report, a final report on the review of the policies. Just to be completely transparent in this, we have went and did a lot of work, and we've done a lot in a very short time. I've reviewed these policies. The final review was 4 times. And each time I provided some pretty detailed comments. I reminded, and writing policies are not easy, by the way. You have to take a lot into consideration. You have to take not just federal guidelines around maximum dollar meals you can have as a government employee, but should you even be having that meal in the first place? So it's a consideration of all of this, and it's not just federal government around maximum meal amounts, but can you, is that even reimbursable under a federal grant or a state grant? So there's a lot that goes into this thought process. There's a lot of review that goes, did you consider this? Did you consider that? But one of the things that I reminded management of is when we get back into risk again and risk of public perception. So sometimes we look at, is it a federal reimbursed activity? Can we do it? Okay, we can, let's do it. Or, are we keeping within our $20 maximum allowance? Okay, let's do it. And what I just asked them to do is remember your audience, and that these now are going to the committee and the board fully, and disclosure, which I think is awesome, is being fully disclosed. Remember your audience, and remember something called public perception risk. And just because it can be put in a policy or somehow found to be okay, you have to ask, how does it look in the eyes of the public? And that always should be considered around everything a government does. The hospitality policy, it doesn't just cover areas for board member meals and such as that. It covers when employee retreats would be okay and how they would be paid for, how other events for employees would be managed and how that would be covered, which is why I said we really need to go back and have more discussion and determine, again, not just can we make it okay under a governing code versus should it be okay under public perception? So that's what we're kind of working through now.
Okay.
And I guess I would just wrap up by saying that we are fairly confident. I mean, I'm committed to us bringing these policies at your next meeting. So that would be at your June meeting, and then it would be followed by taking them to the board of directors for their approval.
Great. Yeah. And just my perception just is watching this, I mean, as Colleen said, we're reacting to the IPA's office and recommendations as something that's kind of new for the organization. It's a muscle that's being learned. Even though this is somewhat delayed, it's definitely far, far, far better than the last audit and the results from the last audit with the salary and compensation. So we're growing, and that's good to see. I do want to reinforce, though, that it is important to make sure we don't end up wasting people's time as well. And the IPA's office is very small, so it's better to just acknowledge that we don't have time to respond versus not actually responding to something and just make it an assumption that means it's not going to be adopted. So I just want to make sure as we go forward that we aren't reviewing the same things over and over again, because it will decrease the efficiency of what's already too small of an office. But appreciate the effort that everybody's taking at this point for sure. Do we have any public member comments on the report for this?
Chair Zito, I wanted to kind of address, because we said we were going to get back to Agnes, so I want to make sure we get back to Agnes. So there was a question that wasn't necessarily around the purchase card corrective action plan, but the delay around the vendor corrective action plan from the vendor audit, which was the prior audit. And I had shared that they were not on time with their actions, nor did they provide an update to me. And she asked what that process looked like. And so Agnes, from our OPA's standpoint, we, and you're probably aware of this, is it's management's responsibility to take action with the corrective action plan. And it's their responsibility to update the auditors when they haven't taken action or if there's a delay. And so out of courtesy, I noted that the vendor corrective action plan there was no updates provided and they had not met their timeline. So we try in the OPA's office, because we do our summary report for all audits as well, to reach out to any corrective action plan that hasn't yet been implemented, including ourselves, and say, where's the status of this? And then we update that report. So in this case, I did reach out a couple of times and ask, where's the status of this vendor corrective action plan? And they verbally said, we're delayed, we're going to update it. And I just said, make sure you update it and provide the reason so I can bring it to the audit committee and be transparent about it. But so there is a process. I think I would encourage, and I'll talk to Colleen about this some more, that management kind of put something on their calendar when they have a corrective action item that they're responsible for, because there's many different people responsible for different actions, that they are checking in and they are keeping us updated. And I do that by my own self, putting it on my calendar, and I think it's helpful. So I would recommend management kind of do it on their end as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mary. Yeah, I hadn't forgotten about Agnes. I just tend to get to the public comment first. So can we go to public comment? Do we have any?
We don't have any public comments.
Okay, yeah, then I do want to check in, Agnes, if you feel like you've had your questions adequately answered at this point, or if you have any further questions of Mary or Colleen.
I think Mary has done a good job explaining the process. Just suggestions. I mean, I've seen some board that actually have a very simple, metric, just show, okay, we have these audit response, this is the deadline. Did it meet the deadline, the status, so that the board, like this committee, can have a sense of, are we on track, or maybe there's some issue that, either management or audit need extra time. I've seen some board doing that, and it can be quite effective. So I want to put it out there. I know.
Agnes, we actually do that, and you're new, and so you haven't seen that report yet, but it will come to you in June. We do have that report, and just as a heads up, it's quite lengthy and it's very tiny font because there's a lot of information, and we're trying to find a way to break that up so it's not so tiny to read. But we do have that, and it will be provided to you next month.
You're going to make me get more powerful reading glasses.
Yes.
Okay, Ed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary. You answered one of the questions I had about the commingling of grant funds with other operating funds. Did we have a policy in place already to track those expenditures? So when we have an event and we use grant funds for discretionary, we'll call them items, to track who was there, who used what, the total expenditure. And then I guess to piggyback on that, are we looking at either regionally or establishing our own blanket purchase agreements so we don't have to use a credit card to buy any number of laptops if we already have a public agency that's gone through the state procedures to have it vetted, so we can just literally piggyback on their agreement by acclamation?
Yes, thank you, Ed. So you will see that. So to answer your question, in the past, based on the audit results, they had a very general, vague, somewhat policy, which was one of the problems. The policy was kind of outdated and not as specific. They are addressing that. I will say in this new policy, they are being very specific around how to address the areas that you've discussed. So in the past, it was just, the documentation that they provided to get reimbursed. Now there's specific detailed form. It's a beautiful form. There's guidelines that go down there along with it on what they must do to support it. And there's a lot more controls built around the policy. So I'll be doing continuous auditing moving forward once the policies are implemented to ensure that they're following the policies are working, the controls are working, and we're all adhering to what we're supposed to be adhering to. I will say one thing, I know Colleen, and I don't know if she's discussed this with anyone yet, but there was an area, one of the recommendations I made was, and one of the control weaknesses that tend to happen when you allow for it is, I know that we want to shorten the number of P cards that we have at this organization, but sometimes doing that, it can almost throw the controls out of whack. And what I mean by that is when you have a user of a purchase card with the holder of the card, the name that's on the card should be the only one using that card. So if for our business purposes, we find that we need more than 6 cards to function, with the consideration of micro purchasing and following all those rules, because they're making sure all those are being followed, and anytime they're allowed to purchase IT equipment, that's all being addressed in the policy. So under those guidelines and the controls that are put in those policies, if it's necessary to have 10 credit cards so that other people are not using other people's cards, I would prefer that versus people having other people's numbers and using other people's cards, because the ability to control the documentation and the approval of those items are way more difficult if you have a number floating out there that people can use. So sometimes it's better controls to have more numbers of cards than it is to allow other people to use someone else's card.
Okay, and real quickly, if I heard you correctly, you said that the policy review has gone through 4 iterations. Is that what you said? 3 different? 4
yeah, I looked, and again, it's 3 policies, so it's many policies.
Right.
I've looked at them 3 times, and then the 4th time was the final one that I did my final report on. And Colleen and Ray came back to me and said, we still need to do some work on this. And
Okay.
so we agreed unitarily that we would pull it and work on it some more.
Okay, so then I think it's extremely important that those various drafts, as they go back and forth, need to be kept. And whether we publish them is one issue or not, but they need to be retained as a record so that we can track the justifications for the initial request, the adjustments. There are subtleties that are going to come out, and I've gone through policy upgrades and revisions, and you have to do that. Otherwise, down the road, 10 years from now, we're going to wonder, why didn't we do this? Well, because this person or that person in this position thought it was important for this reason. So are we keeping all of those documents, and are they available for public review if necessary?
So Ed, I keep everything. I'm an auditor, so there's nothing I don't keep. A little bit too much probably. But yes, so I keep all the comments and all the reviews I do. I track them, I provide it to them. And that's a normal course of a relationship between the audit office and management when they're developing new policies and getting input. You'll often see the back and forth happening, but yes, I do document that. As far as the availability, I will say, being again transparent, under the PRA's, drafts around audit work is typically not something that is requestable. Depending on the need of why someone would want that, I'm sure that would have to be worked out with the general counsel or something.
Okay, and lastly, and then I'll give everyone else a chance. Are we using any other regional policies, maybe not as a baseline, but as a metrics to look at it and say, we're consistent with maybe 80% and the other 20% we differ, but this is why we differ?
Yes, they've been really good about that. They actually have pulled from other cities and counties and special districts. I provided them some from the port through the port auditor that gave it to me. So there's been a lot of effort in looking at other policies and those that are similar to our agency. Like I said, a special district would be the port, and taking into consideration how they manage and track theirs.
Okay, yeah, best practices are going to be key if we have to relive this down the road. Thank you, Mary.
Sure.
Chair, if I may, I wanted to respond to something else that Councilmember Musgrove brought up, and that was about purchase orders as opposed to credit cards. That's absolutely something we're working on as well. And I think the example is when we have the toll road on State Route 125 and we need to buy sprinklers because sprinkler heads break for the landscaping. Instead of using, say, a credit card at Home Depot, we need to have like an open purchase order to be able to purchase. And then that also allows us the ability to make sure we're keeping that inventory. We know exactly then where every sprinkler went. That's really important to us. And so that's another thing that also kind of gets into our contracting process, which the OIPA is currently looking into. And so how we use purchase orders, contracts, all of that, it starts to play into exactly here what we're doing. And then the credit card then is used for something very specific, but not something that's like an ongoing, say, purchase. So just want to let you know that we're definitely looking into that as well.
Absolutely. And the key is there that if one agency has already gone through the vetting process with a vendor, there's no reason for another agency to continue to do that as long as the state has granted them permission. You simply piggyback on their blanket purchase agreement, and it really saves a lot of time, effort, and money. Thank you very much, Colleen.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Stuart.
Thanks. I just want to follow up on a couple of, I thought, interesting points that Ed alluded to. And I'm interested in talking just a little bit about the process for the updating of the policies themselves. We all know that for an organization like Sandag, policies and procedures is massively, massively complex. And so I'm kind of curious in the process, a little bit of the who's in charge of what, and so the project management, if you will, of a very complex process like that. And so I'm wondering if it would be fair to say that in the past, the lead on policy and procedures, manuals, et cetera, was largely the general counsel's office. And now it sounds like you have a much more, not decentralized, but you just sort of have more people involved in the process, a more robust, enhanced process involving more people in the writings, the review, et cetera. And so I'm curious if if you've actually taken like a project management approach to this so that there's clarity as to who's responsible for what, because, it is such a complex beast. Does my question make sense, Colleen?
Yes, yes, Member Halpern, I'm happy to answer that question. So I think, we're going through growing pains and how we tackle this. And so largely in the way that we're organized, Ray Major oversees all of our operations. So ultimately, he's helping to coordinate all of the things that come from the independent auditor. And then that gets assigned to wherever the specific area is for a Sandag staff member to kind of be the lead in responding and then making those recommendations. And then Ray works very closely with the Office of General Counsel, because you're right, that as it fits into board policies, then we make sure that that's going to be fully integrated. So yes, I think the whole concept of project management for this fits into everything about how Sandag operates. I mean, we have all kinds of projects, programs. Everything needs to have an assigned project manager, and I think we're seeing that this is no different.
So just to take a little bit of a step further, would it be fair to say that you actually have a reasonably clear and transparent QC process surrounding this updating of policies, so that there won't be any question as to, Section A, Section B, Section C has got the right eyes looking at it, so that at the end of the process, when it goes to the board, there's real confidence that the right people have been looking at all of the relevant sections that affect their business units, et cetera, and that there's, that everybody's really on board with that QC process?
I think that QC process is still being refined, and I think we're getting better at it as we go. And I really feel that this whole purchase card has been a great example, because I think it's, we have specific policies. We're really able to look at all of this, and we're looking at this really holistically too from our entire management team. And so making sure the Office of General Counsel, but that our whole management team is fully aware and on board with where we're headed.
Great, thank you. I think that's an important feature of this updating process, that you're getting all these eyeballs on this stuff. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Colleen, I do not see anybody else up on the board. This was a discussion item, so I think we can go ahead and move on to the next item, which is the fiscal year 2021 audited comprehensive annual financial report. And I think we will have this taken up by Ian, and I'm going to mangle your last name, Castellana, or?
It's Ian Castellana, but I can go by both. It's all good.
Okay, and Catherine Lai.
Well, Sandag is required to go through a financial and compliance audit each year. This is conducted by independent certified public accounting firm. Crow LLP was the CPA firm who conducted and concluded our FY21 audit in March of this year, including the audit of Sandag's annual comprehensive financial report, or the ACFR, and the basic financial statements of the three component units: the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission, which is an entity responsible for the implementation and administration of transportation improvement programs funded by the San Diego Countywide 0.5% sales tax; SourcePoint, a nonprofit 501c3 corporation; and Automated Regional Justice Information System, ARJIS, a JPA-established system to provide criminal justice information to more than 50 local, state, and federal agencies. Furthermore, Crow also audited the financial statements of the SR 125 toll road operations, and the annual audit includes the single audit and TDA audit. The purpose of the audit is to provide reasonable assurance that Sandag's financial statements are prepared in accordance with GAAP and that they are accurate and reliable. In addition, the audit ensures that Sandag complies with the federal and state laws and regulations and follows the guidelines and provisions pertaining to our federal grants and programs. Sandag had a team of auditors spend months of time performing various audit procedures and conducted numerous audit tests over our financial data before issuing their audit opinions. Kathy Lay, the engagement partner of our audit firm, and her team are joining us today to present to the committee the FY21 audit results. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy for her to introduce her team and present her reports.
Great. Well, good afternoon. My name is Kathy Lyon. I'm a partner with Crow and the lead engagement partner for Sandag. With me today, I'm joined by Jennifer Richards, also a partner with Crow, and then likewise with Rachel Snyder, and she is our lead senior manager on the account. So I'm pleased to be here to present our audit results along with Jennifer. If you could go ahead and advance the slide to the next. Great. So here's our short agenda. It's been quite some time since we've met, so I wanted to spend some time reviewing our engagement objectives. Second, we're going to discuss our audit deliverables and likewise the results. Third, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about a specific finding that we had in relation to P-card purchases and travel. And then last but not least, we'll do some required communications that are required under our professional standards, and certainly questions are welcome throughout and certainly at the end as well. So on the next slide here, we'll talk about the engagement objectives. We were engaged by Sandag to conduct our audit, to express an opinion on the financial statements for the various entities that were described previously, to determine whether or not those financial statements are materially correct in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP for short. We conducted our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, and then also because Sandag is a recipient of federal grants and expends roughly over $200 million every fiscal year, we also conduct our audit in accordance with government auditing standards as well. So as we conduct our audit, our objective is to obtain reasonable rather than absolute assurance as to whether or not those financial statements are free of material misstatement. And it's important to note that there's management responsibilities and auditor responsibilities. Management is entirely responsible for the financial statements for the different entities, including Sandag as a whole. And likewise, all of the internal controls relative to the financial statements and the preparation. We consider internal controls as part of our financial reporting, but we don't express an opinion on the effectiveness of those controls under our engagement with Sandag. So let's go ahead and move on to the results on the next slide. So I'm pleased to report for the Sandag Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the Commission, as well as the Commission statement of cash flows that are required, the South Bay Expressway and Argus and Source Point, that we were able to issue an unmodified opinion. Essentially, my opinion states the financial statements are fairly stated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And so if it's unmodified, that's actually very good news. In addition, we didn't have any recommendations relative to internal controls or compliance findings for these entities listed here. On the next slide, you'll see the results of some other procedures that we've performed. As I mentioned previously, Sandag is the recipient of federal funds. Approximately $235 million were expended in the current year. And so we conduct what's called a single audit, which is an audit of those federal grants. And we had expressed an unmodified opinion relative to the report on compliance for each major federal program. And in this given year, we actually tested 3 federal grants. And for the schedule of findings and question costs, we did have one recommendation that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail that resulted in $2,218 worth of total question costs. Some other deliverables we were engaged to perform. There is a certification of the National Transit Database Report. It's an agreed upon procedures. And then we've also been engaged to perform an AUP over the Coronado Bridge toll revenues. And I'm happy to report there were no exceptions reported. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my partner, Jennifer Richards, to report on the other balance of the deliverables related to the TDA.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So on the next slide, we also issue audit opinions on the Transportation Development Act, or TDA, funds that Sandag is responsible for. So just as a refresher, TDA comes from 1/4% of the sales tax assessed in the region and has some specific audit requirements. So since Sandag administers the TDA program using formulas specified by the state and through a Sandag grant program, Sandag has the responsibility to conduct and oversee those spending of the TDA funds. So we conduct the TDA audits on these. In addition, the County of San Diego has fiduciary responsibility of receiving TDA from the state and dispersing it to claimants as instructions are received from SANDAG. So we also conduct an audit of the county's local transportation fund, which is the bank for the TDA funds, in addition to the audits of the TDA recipients. So for fiscal year ended June 30, 2021, there were 11 cities that were TDA recipients that had expenditures during the year that we audited. There was the County of San Diego, and then the 2 transit operators, SANDAG and Full Access and Coordinated Transportation, or CTSA FACT. So the summary on our results on all of these were unmodified opinions, no qualifications or findings noted. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Kathy.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Jennifer. So if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide. I just did want to spend a minute or two talking about one of the findings that we noted under the single audit, or the audit of the federal grants. So as we've discussed previously on other agenda items relative to purchase card practices, we were aware of these different reviews taking place. And relative to our single audit, we had designed a procedure to review a sample of purchase card transactions specifically charged back as federal expenditures to the federal grants. And for context, there were about $12,731 in total of purchase card transactions related to the 3 grants that we were testing in detail. And Crow had selected a sample of those transactions, and we had noted a few exceptions that we wanted to bring to your attention. The first one was all of these are relating to travel. The first sample was noted for $50 for flight check-in upgrades. And then the second sample was also another $821 where a flight was charged to a federal grant, but was subsequently canceled, but the cost was not credited back to the federal grant. And then last but not least, there were 2 samples totaling about $1,219 where the basic least expensive fare was not selected. And that is actually a requirement under Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 200, related to federal grants. Management had noted that for those 2 transactions that they had asserted that there were only fares available, that the fares that they selected were the only fares available for the required time frame. However, they weren't able to produce any support for their rationale, and so we noted it in our condition. So as part of our procedures, we wanted to make a recommendation to management that they continue to strengthen their policies and internal controls over the review of purchase card transactions that are specifically charged to federal grants. And to be more specific, we wanted to make sure that management in their policies and procedures ensured that they include the rationale, that it should be documented and evidence maintained when anytime the airfare costs are in excess of the basic least expensive unrestricted accommodations class that's offered for travel. And then secondly, if they do have travel reservations that are charged to federal wards, that those should be monitored if, for example, there are any subsequent cancellations or refunds or discounts of any sort, because those changes should be credited back to the related federal grant. We also recommend that management, review their policies surrounding travel expenses and allowable costs to just make sure that they're incorporating the specific requirements of the uniform guidance relating to travel expenses. And we did provide that as part of the criteria of our finding. So that concludes my remarks related to the purchase card. I did want to invite management to any certain extent if they wanted to comment relative to their management response.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. And I'm Andre Dujon, the CFO for SANDAG. And again, just appreciate your comments. And yeah, we agree with everything that Kathy mentioned. Part of it, as you've heard long and hard today, is about the P-card policy, strengthening it, making sure that things are more clear for our staff, which is what we're doing, not only for the P-card policy, but also for the travel policy. So we've accepted what Kathy has said. She's mentioning these are federal charges, but we're doing that not only for federal, but also for state and local charges as well. So we've accepted what the auditor stated, and we're making sure that we've made corrective action plans going forward.
Terrific. Thank you, Andre. And I just have one more slide of my presentation if management wouldn't mind bringing that up, just related to our required communications. It's on the next slide. So I'll go ahead and wrap up here related to the required communications. One more slide in advance. Yeah, so under our professional standards, we're required to communicate certain things. As we mentioned before, the plan scope and the timing of the audit and the objectives were discussed with this audit committee at the onset of our audit. And so now at the conclusion, I'm pleased to report that we didn't have any significant or unusual transactions, any accounting policies that were deviating from previous practices. Those are all neutral, clear, and distinct and consistent with the prior year and clearly disclosed in footnote 1 of each of the financial statements. The accounting estimates, certainly any set of financial statements will include estimates. A great example of that would be in relation to, for example, any pension or OPEB liabilities that require the actuarial valuations to get involved. Management has included all of their accounting estimates within their financial statements, and we did not have any adjustments to that. And then also, we didn't have any corrected or uncorrected misstatements to report to you today. On the following slide, again, I'm pleased to report that we didn't have any, on the next slide, please. I'm pleased to report that we didn't have any significant difficulties or disagreements with management. We're not aware of any consultations that they have made with other auditors, or in other words, if they were shopping for another opinion, if they didn't like any of the recommendations we had noted, and that we also had, at the conclusion of our audit, included a management representation letter for management to represent to us that they have in fact disclosed to their best of their knowledge and belief, all of their accounting records and et cetera to us. And last but not least, but certainly very important, Crow is in fact an independent of Sandag. And with that, I'm happy to address any questions you might have.
Thank you, Catherine. Ian, good report. I guess I'll start with the public. Are there any members of the public?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one in-person public comment. Dr. Bailash, if you'd like to step up to the mic, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, committee. Thank you so much for these reports. I am a clinical physician and have done a lot of contract work. And expenses, expense accounts, computer programs, and databases seem to be inadequate to this type of accounting. The pay periods don't match up with the service times, weekends, off times. And so one question I would ask is there an app on a phone that when you go, for instance, for the food issues, that you would put it in there and it goes into your database to make it easier for people to cut down on the access times? The other thing was my understanding listening to the past months is that the auditors did not find any deliberate or nefarious purposes behind any of the discrepancies with procedures, and that this was much often also during the COVID pandemic periods. I forget the exact time periods that were audited. And I think it'd be important based on what I've seen in the public trying to cast aspersions on staff members of Sandag, that these were somehow deliberately nefarious. And so that's my understanding, and I just bring it to the committee that I'd appreciate when the final reports come in that the determinations of either wrongdoing or deliberate misleading are emphasized. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'm getting a feeling that they were actually probably with regards to agenda item 6, which was the action plan and update on the P-card audit as opposed to the actual comprehensive annual financial report. So hopefully we can take those comments in context and get back to you in the context of item number 6. So any other comments for item 7?
There are no additional comments.
Okay. Do we have any board members wishing to make a comment on item number 7? Agnes. You're muted, Agnes.
Just a quick question about that $2,000 errors or whatever we call it. So is that the only amount that we're at risk to get disallowed from all these federal grants, or do we have any risk that the agency may say, hey, this is you're only finding things on a sampling basis and we need to extrapolate a larger and allowable amount? Can you comment on that?
Yes, through the chair again, Kathy Lai with Crow. Just for full context, there's about $235 million of federal expenditures. Of those federal expenditures, we had tested 3 federal grants in detail, or referred to as major programs. That's the FTC cluster, the Transit Services cluster, and the Highway Planning and Construction cluster. For all of those 3 grants, the total of P card purchases, per our review, was only $12,731. It's typically not a common type of expenditure that we see, but just given the environment, we wanted to select, a sample relative to the 12,731 in expenditures. And for context, we looked at about $4,483 of the 12,000. So I think it was roughly around 35%. And then based on our sample of transactions, we noted that there was, roughly about $2,218 of likely and questioned costs. So everything is done on a sample basis. And so, certainly, management and likewise those users of this respective report are clear, with respect to the context that we provided in our written findings. So of course there is potential. There's additional potential, but knowing that the entire population of P card transactions for these 3 grants in total were 12,000, that gives you at least some level of, comfort, at least with respect to these 3 federal grants. Does that address your question?
Yeah, I think so. So you're saying that P card charges is a very small amount of the federal grants. So even though the percentage of questionable cost seems like a lot, right? 2,000 over 4,000 that you looked at. Am I hearing that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Again, the context is we sampled $4,483 of the 12,731 total P card purchases, again, for those 3 federal grants that we tested in total, not the entire $235 million on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And so of that 4,483, there were that $2,218 in question costs, known and likely, question costs. Management had asserted certain things related to, we did select these certain airfares because the least expensive wasn't available at the time, but they didn't have documentation to provide to us as auditors. So we felt compelled that we needed to report that. And just from a best practice perspective on a go forward, you're spending all of this time and effort to review and craft detailed procurement policies and procedures. We just felt it was important to point out relative to federal grants that you should be thinking about, travel costs as well, because that's what we had seen predominantly charged back to the federal grants for the ones that we looked at.
Okay, great. So if I understand it correctly, the P card charges is a small piece of all the federal grant expenditure based on this 3 grant review. Although when you did the sampling, the question cost percentage is actually quite high. However, it's probably due to lack of documentation and not necessarily the nature of the expenses, right? So.
For some of them, it was lack of documentation. But, again, we had a sample for $50 for flight check-in upgrades. And technically, there's, according to the federal policy related to travel, it should be the least basic fare available. And then, another added part of that finding that I described was there was a flight that was charged to the federal grant. It was around $821, and then it was subsequently canceled. But then that cost wasn't credited back to the federal grant. So it's not only, making sure that you have proper documentation, making sure you have proper policies and procedures, but those 2 other, aspects for the samples that we examined, lent to our recommendation that we made to management.
Okay, good. Oh, thank you. So it does sound like the P card policy need to be strengthened, in a broader sense. Okay, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stuart, I see you're up.
Thank you. Kathy, we only see you once a year, so I'll apologize if some of my questions are actually from the prior cycle and not actually relating to this cycle. But I do recall in the past, you mentioned what I would characterize as some minor concern about a little bit of thinness on the finance staff. And so I'm just curious, in the experience of doing the audit this year, if you felt like the team was sufficiently well staffed so that you were able to get good response times and, segregation of duties, kinds of concerns, those sorts of things that actually speak to the number of people that Andre has on the team now versus whenever it was, and it may have been 2 cycles ago that I think you'd referenced that there was some concern on a little bit of thinness of staff.
I'm having a hard time, Member Halpern, just remembering the exact comments, but I will say this in general, adding additional staff relative to any finance department, you won't find an auditor that won't be a proponent of that. The last couple of years are really a hard, it's a hard baseline to judge because we've been through quite a bit relative to COVID and the moving to a remote workforce and then, a hybrid and, evidence today, right? We're having a hybrid type meeting with outbreaks here or there. So I would say that maybe the timeliness of providing documents could improve. That I think we did maybe observe that taking maybe a bit longer just in the last year or two. It's hard to decipher, is this COVID and remote? Is it really related to, vacant positions and shifting? I did not observe a segregation of duties control recommendation. Otherwise, I certainly would have brought it forth to this committee. And even going back to this purchase card, finding that we had the 12,000, to Member Nickerson's point, it's not material quantitatively relative to the federal grant, but we did feel like it was necessary just to bring to your attention. I thought it warranted the audit committee's attention, especially given, the significant effort. So it has been a little bit challenging the last couple of years. We are hoping that it's going to normalize. I wouldn't characterize, Crow has a really good working relationship with management. I'm sure you can talk to Andre and Leanne. We don't shy away from making certain recommendations when we find that, based on our audit work. And we'll work very closely to try to improve the timeliness, relative to receiving documents. We try to do all that we can to give them appropriate lead time to pull documents for us, et cetera. But it has just been a bit challenging in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and also to be clear, I'm not in any way being critical of the staff, but rather to your point that oftentimes teams are under-resourced. And, it's something that we've talked about, certainly with Mary's team, and I think Andre's team as well, is just, Sandag is a very complex organization. And it's important that we all have good insight as to whether, on the finance control side, that they're sufficiently staffed. So it's very helpful to get your insights. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And maybe, now that I think about it, that comment could have related, Jennifer Richards, related to some of the TDA audits that we have done in the past too, right? Because some of them have been, in fact, delayed in the past because of COVID or otherwise, or turnover within those respective, city or county locations. And this great resignation, it's very real. We see it, and CPI is at 7.5%, right? The greatest it's been since 1981. So, I know it's really difficult, and I can appreciate some of the previous discussion, Mary, related to just getting really good resources in the audit team, and then likewise on the finance side as well.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Stuart. What's the other questions? I guess I'll have a question for staff, which is, the findings that were made here were specific to the P card with respect to federal travel, but I think, as an agency that is expected to be responsible for taxpayer dollar oversight, I would assume those same travel requirements would apply no matter where the charges come from, and that we have a general travel policy. And maybe you could talk about, how we're going to tighten that up a little bit, saying that people in general are expected to use lowest proposed fare, that there is a policy in place that stipulates when an upgrade could or should occur, and that kind of stuff that applies across the board and not just to P card.
Yeah, like I mentioned, when Kathy's talking about it, she's looking specifically at federal funds, and that's
Right.
a very small portion of what we spend. Certainly we spend more than $12,000 a year on travel. So we have a lot on local and state. So it's across the board that we're trying to be a lot more careful about it going forward. I think if I can just maybe spend a minute and kind of talk about specific findings so you can understand it. So one of the travel was a flight to Washington. And so when you go to on Southwest Airlines, there's 3 different types that you can book on, right? Want to getaway is ultimately what you want to do, or then there's a middle one and then there's business select. But sometimes they're not available. For example, on this particular trip, going out, it was business select, coming back, there wasn't available. So, going there was wanna getaway, coming back, used business select because wanna getaway was not available. But Kathy's right, we didn't have the proof of the documentation to show that, right? So now we're making sure that we take screenshots of everything ahead of time. The other one was a meeting was canceled, was actually Ray Major going out to Washington, DC. And then the meeting was canceled, I think it was COVID related, and so it was expensed and then charged. We should put it to a prepaid. So we're very careful about that now. And then the last 2 was, when you get Southwest, $25, trying to book in advance so you can, within the 24 hours, that is not allowable. So how that got away, generally staff, if they want to do that, they can, but they have to reimburse us. And we didn't have the proof of reimbursement. So it's just a matter of really tightening everything that we do. And I think, again, with the P-card changes that we're doing along with the travel, all of these are being addressed. So I'm confident that, if Kathy comes in a year from now, does the same review, she will not find that, because based on the policies that we're putting in place, we're going to be very careful about these kind of issues.
Great, thanks for that update. Anybody else with comments or questions? If not, I believe that brings us to the end of the agenda. Our next audit committee meeting has been scheduled for Friday, June 10th, 2022 at 12:30 p.m. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. It looks like it's going to be a nice one. And we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.